So, the Dark Lord rumbled, you have come to me, and you to me. The Emperor is expecting you. He believes you will turn to the dark side. I know, Father. It was a momentous act for Luke to address his father as his father, but he'd done it now and kept himself under control, and the moment was past, it was done. He felt stronger for it. He felt potent. So you have finally accepted the truth, Vader gloated. I have accepted the truth that you were once Anakin Skywalker, my father. That name no longer has any meaning for me. It was a name from long ago, a different life, a different universe. Could he truly once have been that man? It is the name of your true self. Luke's gaze bore steadily down on the cloaked figure. You have only forgotten. I know there is good in you. The Emperor hasn't driven it fully away. He molded with his voice, tried to form the potentially reality of the strength of his belief. That's why you could not destroy me. That's why you won't take me to your Emperor now. Vader seemed almost to smile through his mask as his son's use of Jedi voice manipulation. He looked down at the lightsaber the captain had given him, Luke's lightsaber. So the boy was truly a Jedi now, a man grown. He held the lightsaber up. You have constructed another. This one is mine, Luke said quietly. I no longer use yours. Vader ignited the blade, examined its humming, brilliant light like an admiring craftsman. Your skills are complete. Indeed, you are as powerful as the Emperor has foreseen. They stood there for a moment, the lightsaber between them. Sparks dove in and out of the cutting edge, photons pushed to the brink by the energy pulsing between these two warriors. Come with me, Father. Vader shook his head. Ben once thought as you do. Don't blame Ben for your fall. Luke took a step closer, then stopped. Vader did not move. You don't know the power of the dark side. I must obey my master. I will not turn. You will be forced to destroy me, if that is your destiny. This was not his wish, but the boy was strong. If it came at last to blows, yes, he would destroy Luke. He could no longer afford to hold back as he once had. Search your feelings, Father. You can't do this. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate. But Vader hated no one. He only lusted too blindly. Someone has filled your mind with foolish ideas, young one. The Emperor will show you the true nature of the Force. He is your master now. Vader signaled to a squad of distant stormtroopers as he extinguished Luke's lightsaber. The guards approached. Luke and the Dark Lord faced one another for a long, searching moment. Vader spoke just before the guards arrived. It is too late for me, son. Then my father is truly dead, answered Luke. So what was to stop him from killing the evil one who stood before him now? He wondered. Nothing, perhaps. The vast rebel fleet hung poised in space, ready to strike. It was hundreds of light years from the Death Star, but in hyperspace all time was a moment, and the deadliness of an attack was measured not in distance but in precision. Ships changed in formation from corner to side, creating a faceted diamond shape to the armada, as if, like a cobra, the fleet was spreading its hood. The calculations required to launch such a meticulously coordinated offensive at light speed made it necessary to fix on a stationary point, that is, stationary relative to the point of re-entry from hyperspace. The point chosen by the rebel command was a small blue planet of the Sulla system. The armada was positioned around it, now this unblinking Corellian world. It looked like the eye of the serpent. The Millennium Falcon finished its rounds of the fleet's perimeter, checking final positions, then pulled into place beneath the flagship. The time had come. Lando was at the controls of the Falcon. Beside him, his co-pilot, Nien Nunb, a jowled, mouse-eyed creature from Sullust, flipped switches, monitored readouts, and made final preparations for the jump to hyperspace. Lando set his comlink to War Channel. Last hand of the night, his deal, a table full of high rollers, his favorite kind of game. With dry mouth, he made his summary report to Akbar on the command ship. Admiral, we're in position. All fighters are accounted for. Akbar's voice crackled back over the headset. Proceed with the countdown. All groups assume attack coordinates. Lando turned to his co-pilot with a quick smile. Don't worry, my friends are down there. They'll have that shield down on time. He turned back to his instruments, saying under his breath, or this will be the shortest offensive of all time. The co-pilot replied. All right, Lando grunted. Stand by, then. He He patted the control panel for good luck, even though his deepest belief was that a good gambler made his own luck. Still, that's what Han's job was this time, and Han almost never let Lando down. Just once, and that was a long time ago in a star system far, far away. This time was different. This time they were going to redefine luck and call it Lando. He smiled and patted the panel one more time, just right. Up on the bridge of the Star Cruiser command ship, Akbar paused, looked around at his generals. All was ready. "Are all groups in their attack coordinates?" he asked. He knew they were. "Affirmative, Admiral." Akbar gazed out his view window meditatively at the starfield for perhaps the last reflective moment he would ever have. He spoke finally into the comlink war channel. "All craft will begin the jump to hyperspace on my mark. May the Force be with us." He reached forward to the signal button. In the Falcon, Lando stared at the identical galactic ocean with the same sense of grand moment, but also with foreboding. They were doing what a guerrilla force must never do, engage the enemy like a traditional army. The Imperial Army, fighting the Rebellion's guerrilla war, was always losing, unless it won. The Rebels, by contrast, were always winning, unless they lost. And now, here was the most dangerous situation. The Alliance drawn into the open to fight on the Emperor's terms. If the Rebels lost this battle, they lost the war. Suddenly, the signal light flashed on the control panel, Akbar's mark. The attack was commenced. Lando pulled back the conversion switch and opened up the throttle. Outside the cockpit, the stars beamed streaking by. The streaks grew brighter and longer as the ships of the fleet roared in large segments at light speed, keeping pace first with the very photons of the radiant stars in the vicinity, and then soaring through the warp into hyperspace itself and disappearing in the flash of a muon. The blue crystal planet hovered in space alone once again, staring unseeing into the void. The strike squad crouched behind a woodsy ridge overlooking the Imperial outpost. Leia viewed the area through a small electronic scanner. 2 shuttles were being offloaded on the landing platform docking ramp. Several walkers were parked nearby. Troops stood around, helped with construction, took watch, carried supplies. The massive shield generator hummed off to the side. Flattened down in the bushes on the ridge with the strike force were several Ewoks, including Wicket, Paploo, Teebo, and Warwick. The rest stayed lower behind the knoll out of sight. Leia put down the scanner and scuttled back to the others. "The entrance is on the far side of that landing platform. This isn't going to be easy." Chewbacca agreed. "Oh, come on, Chewie," Han gave the Wookiee a pained look. "We've gotten into more heavily guarded places than that." Chewie countered with a dismissing gesture. Han thought for a second. "Well, the spice vaults of Gargun were one." Chewbacca shook his head. "Of course I'm right. Now, if I could just remember how I did it." Han scratched his head, poking his memory. Suddenly, Paploo began chattering away, pointing and squealing. He garbled something to Wicket. "What's he saying, 3PO?" Leia asked. The golden droid exchanged a few terse sentences with Paploo, then Wicket turned to Leia with a hopeful grin. 3PO too now looked at the princess. Apparently Wicket knows about a back entrance to this installation. Han perked up at that. "A back door? That's it. That's how we did it." 4 Imperial scouts kept watch over the entrance to the bunker that half emerged from the earth far to the rear of the main section of the shield generator complex. Their rocket bikes were parked nearby. In the undergrowth beyond, the Rebel strike squad lay in wait. Chewbacca observed slowly. "You're right, Chewie," Solo agreed. "With just those guards, this should be easier than breaking up Bantha. It only takes one of them to sound the alarm," Leia cautioned. Han grinned a bit over self-confidently. "Then we'll have to do this real quiet-like. If Luke can just keep Vader off of our backs, like he said he would, this ought to be no sweat. Just gotta hit those guards fast and quiet." 3PO whispered to Teebo and Paploo, explaining the problem and the objective. The Ewoks babbled giddily a moment, then Paploo jumped up and raced through the underbrush. Leia checked the instrument on her wrist. "We're running out of time. The fleet's in hyperspace by now." 3PO muttered a question to Teebo and received a short reply. "Oh dear," 3PO replied, starting to rise to look into the clearing beside the bunker. "Stay down," rasped Solo. "What is it, 3PO?" Leia demanded. "I'm afraid our furry companion has gone and done something rather rash." The droid hoped he wasn't to be blamed for this. "What are you talking about?" Leia's voice cut with an edge of fear. "Oh no. Look!" Paploo had scampered down through the bushes to where the scout's bikes were parked. Now, with the skinny horror of inevitability, the rebel leaders watched the little ball of fur swing his pudgy body up onto one of the bikes and begin flipping switches at random. Before anyone could do anything, the bike's engines ignited with a rumbling roar. The 4 scouts looked over in surprise. Pop Blue grinned madly and continued flipping switches. Leia held her forehead. Oh, no, 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 no. Chewie barked. Han nodded. So much for our surprise attack. The Imperial Scout raced toward Pop Blue just as the forward drive engaged, zooming the little teddy bear into the forest. He had all he could do just to hang on to the handlebar with his stubby paws. 3 of the guards jumped on their own bikes and sped off in pursuit of the hot rod Ewok. The 4th Scout stayed at his post near the door of the bunker. Leia was delighted, if a bit incredulous. Not bad for a ball of fuzz, Han admired. He nodded at Chewie, and the 2 of them slipped down toward the bunker. Pop Blue, meanwhile, was sailing through the trees, more lucky than in control. He was going at fairly low velocity for what the bike could do, but in Ewok time, Pop Blue was absolutely dizzy with speed and excitement. It was terrifying, but he loved it. He would talk about the ride until the end of his life, and then his children would tell their children, and it would get faster with each generation. For now, though, the Imperial Scouts were already pulling in sight behind him, when, a moment later, they began firing laser bolts at him. He decided he'd finally had enough. As he rounded the next tree, just out of their sight, he grabbed a vine and swung up into the branches. Several seconds later, the 3 scouts tore by underneath him, pressing their pursuit to the limit. He giggled furiously. Back at the bunker, the last scout was undone. Subdued by Chewbacca, bound, stripped of his suit, he was being carried into the woods now by 2 other members of the strike team. The rest of the squad silently crouched, forming a perimeter around the entrance. Han stood at the door, checking the stolen code against the digits on the bunker's control panel. With natural speed, he punched a series of buttons on the panel. Silently, the door opened. Leia peeked inside. No sign of life. She motioned the others and entered the bunker. Han and Chewie followed close on her heels. Soon the entire team was huddled inside the otherwise empty steel corridor, leaving one lookout outside dressed in the unconscious scout's uniform. Han pushed a series of buttons on the inner panel, closing the door behind them. Leia thought briefly of Luke. She hoped he could detain Vader at least long enough to allow her to destroy their shield generator. She hoped even more dearly he could avoid such a confrontation altogether, for she feared Vader was the stronger of the 2. Furtively, she led the way down the dark and low-beam tunnel. Vader's shuttle settled onto the docking bay of the Death Star like a black, wingless, canyon-eating bird, like a nightmare insect. Luke and the Dark Lord emerged from the snout of the beast with a small escort of stormtroopers and walked rapidly across the cavernous main bay to the Emperor's tower elevator. Royal guards awaited them there, flanking the shaft bathed in a carmine glow. They opened the elevator door. Luke stepped forward. His mind was buzzing with what to do. It was the Emperor. He was being taken to now. The Emperor. If Luke could not focus, keep his mind clear to see what must be done, and do it, a great noise filled his head, though, like an underground wind. He hoped Leia deactivated the deflector shield quickly and destroyed the Death Star now, while all 3 of them were here, before anything else could happen. For the closer Luke came to the Emperor, the more anythings he feared would happen. A black storm raged inside him. He wanted to kill the Emperor, but then what? Confront Vader? What would his father do? And what if Luke faced his father first, faced him and destroyed him? The thought was at once repugnant and compelling. Destroy Vader? And then what? For the first time, Luke had a brief murky image of himself standing on his father's body, holding his father's blazing power, and sitting at the Emperor's right hand. He squeezed his eyes shut against this thought, but it left a cold sweat on his brow, as if death's hand had brushed him there and left its shallow imprint. The elevator door opened. Luke and Vader walked out into the throne room alone, across the unlit antechamber, up the graded stairs to stand before the throne. Father and son, side by side, both dressed in black, one masked and one exposed, beneath the gaze of the malignant Emperor. Vader bowed to his master. The Emperor motioned him to rise, though. The Dark Lord did his master's bidding. "Welcome, young Skywalker." The Evil One smiled graciously. "I have been expecting you." Luke stared back brazenly at the bent, hooded figure. Defiantly, the Emperor's smile grew even softer, though, even more fatherly. He looked at Luke's manacles. "You no longer need these," he added with noblesse oblige, and made the slightest motion with his finger in the direction of Luke's wrist. At that, Luke's binders simply fell away, clattering noisily to the floor. Luke looked at his own hands, free now to reach out of the Emperor's throat to crush his windpipe in an instant. Yet the Emperor seemed gentle. Had he not just let Luke free? But he was devious too. Luke knew. Do not be fooled by appearances, Ben had told him. The Emperor was unarmed, he could still strike, but wasn't aggression part of the dark side? Mustn't he avoid that at all costs? Or could he use darkness judiciously and then put it away? He stared at his free hands. He could have ended it all right there. Or could he? He had total freedom to choose what to do now, yet he could not choose. Choice, the double-edged sword. He could kill the Emperor, he could succumb to the Emperor's arguments, he could kill Vader, and then he could even become Vader. Again, this thought laughed at him as like a broken clown, until he pushed it back into a black corner of his brain. The Emperor sat before him, smiling. The moment was convulsive with possibilities. The moment passed. He did nothing. "Tell me, young Skywalker," the Emperor said when he saw Luke's first struggle had taken its course, "who has been involved in your training until now?" The smile was thin, open-mouthed, and hollow. Luke was silent. He would reveal nothing. "Oh, I know it was Obi-Wan Kenobi at first," the wicked ruler continued, rubbing his fingers together as if trying to remember, then pausing, his lips creased into a sneer. "Of course, we're familiar with the talent Obi-Wan Kenobi had. When it came to training Jedi," he nodded politely in Vader's direction, indicating Obi-Wan's previous star pupil. Vader stood without responding, without moving. Luke tensed with fear at the Emperor's defamation of Ben, though of course to the Emperor it was praise, and he bridled even more knowing the Emperor was so nearly right. He tried to bring his anger under control though, for it seemed to please the malevolent dictator greatly. Palpatine noted the emotions on Luke's face and chuckled. "So, in your early training you have followed your father's path, it would seem. But alas, Obi-Wan is now dead, I believe. His elder student here saw to that." Again he made a hand motion toward Vader. "So tell me, young Skywalker, who continued your training?" That smile again, like a knife. Luke held silent, struggling to regain his composure. The Emperor tapped his fingers on the arm of the throne, recalling, "There was one called Yoda, an aged master Jet. Ah, I see by your countenance I have hit a chord. A resonant chord indeed. Yoda, then." Luke flashed with anger at himself now to have revealed so much, unwillingly, unwittingly. Anger and self-doubt. He strove to calm himself, to see all, to show nothing, only to be. "This Yoda," the Emperor mused. "Lives he still?" Luke focused on the emptiness of space beyond the window beyond the Emperor's chair, the deep void where nothing was. Nothing. He filled his mind with this black nothing, opaque save for the occasional flickering of starlight that filtered through the ether. "Ah," cried Emperor Palpatine, "he lives not. Very good, young Skywalker. You almost hid this from me. But you could not, and you cannot. Your deepest flickerings are to me apparent. Your nakedness soul, that is my first lesson to you," he beamed. Luke wilted but a moment. In the very faltering he found strength. Thus had Ben and Yoda both instructed him. When you are attacked, fall. Let your opponent's power buffet you as a strong wind topples the grass. In time he will expend himself and you will still be upright. The Emperor watched Luke's face with cunning. "I'm sure Yoda taught you to use the Force with great skill." The taunt had its desired effect. Luke's face flushed, his muscles flexed. He saw the Emperor actually lick his lips at the sight of Luke's reaction. Lick his lips and laugh from the bottom of his throat, the bottom of his soul. Luke paused, for he saw something else as well, something he hadn't seen before in the Emperor. Fear. Luke saw fear in the Emperor. Fear of Luke. Fear of Luke's power. Fear that this power could be turned on him, on the Emperor, in the same way Vader had turned it on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Luke saw this fear in the Emperor, and he knew now the odds had shifted slightly. He had glimpsed the Emperor's nakedest self. With sudden absolute calm, Luke stood upright. He stared directly into the malign ruler's hood. Palpatine said nothing for a few moments, returning the young Jedi's gaze, assessing his strengths and weaknesses. He sat back at last, pleased with this first confrontation. "I look forward to completing your training, young Skywalker. In time you will call me Master." For the first time, Luke felt steady enough to speak. "You're gravely mistaken. You will not convert me as you did my father." "No, my young Jedi," the Emperor leaned forward, gloating. "You will find that it is you who are mistaken. About a great many things." Palpatine suddenly stood, came down from his throne, walked up very close to Luke, stared venomously into the boy's eyes. At last, Luke saw the entire face within the hood. Eyes sunken like tombs, the flesh decayed beneath skin weathered by virtuous storms, lined by holocaust, the grin a death's grin, the breath corrupt. Vader extended a gloved hand toward the Emperor, holding out Luke's lightsaber. The Emperor took it with a slow sort of glee, then walked with it across the room to the huge circular view window. The Death Star had been revolving slowly, so the sanctuary moon was now visible at the window's curving margin. Palpatine looked at Endor, then back at the lightsaber in his hand. Ah, yes, a Jedi's weapon, much like your father's. He faced Luke directly. By now you must know your father can never be turned from the dark side. So will it be with you. Never. Soon I will die, and you with me. Luke was confident of that now. He allowed himself the luxury of a boast. The Emperor laughed a vile laugh. Perhaps you refer to the imminent attack of your rebel fleet? Luke had a thick, reeling moment, then steadied himself. The Emperor went on. I assure you, we are quite safe from your friends here. Vader walked toward the Emperor, stood at his side, looking at Luke. Luke felt increasingly raw. Your overconfidence is your weakness, he challenged them. Your faith in your friends is yours. The Emperor began smiling, but then his mouth turned down, his voice grew angry. Everything that has transpired has done so according to my design. Your friends up there on the sanctuary moon, they're walking into a trap, and so is your rebel fleet. Luke's face twitched visibly. The Emperor saw this and really began to foam. It was I who allowed the Alliance to know the location of the shield generator. It is quite safe from your pitiful little band. An entire legion of my troops await them there. Luke's eyes darted from the Emperor to Vader and finally to the lightsaber in the Emperor's hand. His mind quivered with alternatives. Suddenly everything was out of control again. He could count on nothing but himself, and on himself his hold was tenuous. The Emperor kept rattling on imperiously. I'm afraid the deflector shield will be quite operational when your fleet arrives, and that is only the beginning of my surprise. But of course, I don't wish to spoil it for you. The situation was degenerating fast, from Luke's perspective. Defeat after defeat was being piled on his head. How much could he take? And now another surprise coming? There seemed to be no end to the rank deeds Palpatine could carry out against the galaxy. Slowly, infinitesimally, Luke raised his hand in the direction of the lightsaber. The Emperor continued, From here, young Skywalker, you will witness the final destruction of the Alliance, and the end of your insignificant rebellion. Luke was in torment. He raised his hand further. He realized both Palpatine and Vader were watching him. He lowered his hand, lowered his level of anger, tried to restore his previous calm, to find his center to see what it was he needed to do. The Emperor smiled a thin, dry smile. He offered the lightsaber to Luke. You want this, don't you? The hate is swelling in you now. Very good. Take your Jedi weapon. Use it. I am unarmed. Strike me down with it. Give in to your anger. With each passing moment, you make yourself more my servant. His rasping laughter echoed off the walls like desert wind. Vader continued staring at Luke. Luke tried to hide his agony. No, never. He thought desperately of Ben and Yoda. They were part of this force now, part of the energy that shaped it. Was it possible for them to distort the Emperor's vision by their presence? No one was infallible. Ben had told him surely the Emperor couldn't see everything, couldn't know every future, twist every reality to suit his gluttony. Ben, thought Luke, if ever I needed your guidance, it is now. Where can I take this, that it will not lead me to ruin? As if in answer, the Emperor leered and put the lightsaber down on the control chair near Luke's hand. It is unavoidable, the Emperor said quietly. It is your destiny. You, like your father, are now mine. Luke had never felt so lost. Han, Chewie, Leia, and a dozen commandos made their way down the labyrinth corridors toward the area where the shield generator room was marked on the stolen map. Yellow lights illuminated the low rafters, casting long shadows at each intersection. At the first three turnings, all remained quiet. They saw no guard or worker. At the fourth cross corridor, 6 Imperial stormtroopers stood a wary watch. There was no way around. The section had to be traversed. Han and Leia looked at each other and shrugged. There was nothing for it but to fight. With pistols drawn, they barged into the entryway, almost as if they had been expecting an attack. The guards instantly crouched and began firing their own weapons. A barrage of laser bolts followed, ricocheting from girder to floor. 2 stormtroopers were hit immediately. A third lost his gun. Pinned behind a refrigerator console, he was unable to do much but stay low. 2 more stood behind a fire door, though, and blasted each commando who tried to get through. 4 went down. The guards were virtually impregnable behind their vulcanized shield, but virtually didn't account for Wookiees. Chewbacca rushed the door, physically dislodged it on top of the 2 stormtroopers. They were crushed. Leia shot the 6th guard as he stood jaw bead on Chewie. The trooper, who'd been crouching beneath the refrigerator unit, suddenly bolted to go for help. Han raced after him a few long strides and brought him down with a flying tackle. He was out cold. They checked themselves over, accounted for casualties. Not too bad, but it had been noisy. They'd have to hurry now before a general alarm was set. The power center that controlled the shield generator was very near, and there would be no second chances. The rebel fleet broke out of hyperspace with an awesome roar. Amid glistening streamers of light, battalion after battalion emerged in formation to fire off toward the Death Star and its sanctuary moon hovering brightly in the close distance. Soon the entire Navy was bearing down on its target, the Millennium Falcon in the lead. Lando was worried from the moment they came out of hyperspace. He checked his screen, reversed polarities, queried the computer. The co-pilot was perplexed as well. But how could that be? Lando demanded. We've got to be able to get some kind of reading on that shield, up or down. Who was coming whom on this raid? Nien Nunb pointed out the control panel, shaking his head. Jammed. How could they be jamming us if they don't know we're coming? He grimaced at the onrushing Death Star as the implications of what he just said sank in. This was not a surprise attack at all. It was a spider web. He hit the switch on his comlink. Break off the attack. The shield's still up. Red Leader's voice shouted back over the headphones. I get no reading. Are you sure? Pull up, Lando commanded. Oh crap, pull up! He banked hard to the left, the fighters of the Red Squad veering close on his tail. Some didn't make it. 3 flanking X-Wings nicked the invisible deflector shield, spinning out of control, exploding in flames along the shield surface. None of the others paused to look back. On the Rebel Star Cruiser bridge, alarms are screaming, lights flashing, klaxons bearing as the Mammoth space cruiser abruptly altered its momentum, trying to change course in time to avoid collision with the shield. Officers are running from battle stations to navigation controls. Other ships in the fleet could be seen through the view screens, careening wildly 100 directions, moves some slowing, some speeding up. Admiral Akbar spoke urgently but quietly in the comlink. Take evasive action. Green Group, steer course for holding sector MG7. Blue Group, a Mon Calamari controller across the bridge called out to Akbar with grave excitement. Admiral, we have enemy ships sector RT-23 and PB-4. The large central view screen was coming alive. It was no longer just the Death Star and the green moon behind it, floating isolated in space. Now the massive Imperial Fleet could be seen flying in perfect regimental formation, out from behind Endor in 2 behemoth flanking waves, heading to surround the Rebel fleet from both sides, like the pincers of a deadly scorpion. And the shield barricaded the Alliance in front. They had nowhere to go. Akbar spoke desperately into the comlink. It's a trap! Prepare for attack! An anonymous fighter's pilot's voice came back over the radio. Fighters coming in! Here we go! The attack began. The battle was joined. TIE fighters first. They were much faster than the bulky Imperial cruisers, so they were the first to make contact with the Rebel invaders. Savage dogfights ensued, and soon the black sky was aglow with ruby explosions. An aide approached Akbar. We've added power to the forward shield, Admiral. Good. Double power on the main battery, and suddenly the Star Cruiser was rocked by thermonuclear fireworks outside the observation window. Gold Wing is hit hard, another officer shouted, stumbling up the bridge. Give them cover, Akbar ordered. We must have time. He spoke again into the comlink as yet another detonation rumbled the frigate. All ships, stand your position. Wait for my command to return. It was far too late for Lando and his attack squadrons to heed that order, though. They were already way ahead of the pack, heading straight for the oncoming Imperial fleet. Wedge Antilles, Luke's old buddy from the first campaign, led the X-Wings that accompanied the Falcon. As they drew near the Imperial defenders, his voice came over the comlink, calm and experienced. Lock S-foils and attack positions! The wings split like dragonfly gossamers, poised and increased maneuvering and power. All wings report in, said Lando. Red leader standing by, Wedge replied. Green leader standing by. Blue leader standing by. Gray leader! This last transmission was interrupted by a display of pyrokinetics that completely disintegrated Grey Wing. "Here they come," Wedge commented. "Accelerate to attack speed," Leto ordered. "Draw fire away from the cruisers as long as possible." "Copy, Gold Leader," Wedge responded. "We're moving into point 3 across the axis. 2 of them coming in at 20 degrees, someone advised. "I see them," noted Wedge. "Cut left, I'll take the leader." "Watch yourself, Wedge. 3 from above." "Yeah, I'm on it, Red Leader. There's too many of them. You're taking a lot of fire. Back off. Red 4, watch out. I'm hit." The X-Wing spun, sparking across the starfield, out of power into the void. "You picked one up, watch it," Red 6 yelled at Wedge. "My scop's negative, where is he?" "Red 6, a squadron of fighters has broken through. They're heading for the medical frigate, after them." "Go ahead," Lando agreed, "I'm going in. There are 4 marks at .35, cover me." "Right behind you, Gold Leader." "Red 2, Red 3, pull in. Hang on back there. Close up formation, Blue Group." "Good shooting, Red 2. "Not bad," said Lando. "I'll take out the other 3. Calrissian steered the Falcon into the complete flip as his crew fired at the Imperial fighters from the belly guns. 2 were direct hits, the 3rd a glancing blow that caused the TIE fighter to tumble into another of its own squads. The heavens were absolutely thick with them, but the Falcon was faster by half anything else that flew. Within a matter of minutes, the battlefield was a diffused red glow spotted with puffs of smoke, blazing fireballs, whirling spark showers, spinning debris, rumbling implosions, shafts of light, tumbling machinery, space-frozen corpses, wells of blackness, electron storms. It was a grim and dazzling spectacle, and only beginning. Nien Nunb made a gurgiteful aside to Lando. "You're right," the pilot frowned. "Only their fighters are attacking. What are those Star Destroyers waiting for?" Looked like the Emperor was trying to get for the rebels to buy some real estate he wasn't intending to sell. The co-pilot warned as another squadron of TIE fighters swooped down from above. "I see him. We're sure in the middle of it now." He took a second to glance at Endor, floating peacefully off to his right. "Come on, Han, oh buddy, don't let me down." Han pressed the button on his wrist unit and covered his head. The reinforced door to the main control room blew and melted into pieces. The rebel squad stormed through the gaping portal. The stormtroopers inside seemed taken completely by surprise. A few were injured by the exploding door. The rest gawked in dismay as the rebels rushed them with guns drawn. Han took the lead, Leia right behind, Chewie covered the rear. They herded all the personnel into one corner of the bunker. 3 commandos guarded them there, 3 more covered the exits. The rest began placing the explosive charges. Leia studied on one of the screens on the control panel. "Hurry, Han, look, the fleet's being attacked." Solo looked over at the screen. "Blast it, with the shield still up, they're backed against the wall." "That is correct," came a voice from the rear of the room. "Just as you are." Han and Leia spun around to find dozens of Imperial guns trained on them. An entire legion had been hiding in the wall compartments of the bunker. Now in a single moment the rebels are surrounded. Nowhere to run. Far too many stormtroopers to fight. Completely surrounded. More Imperial troops charged through the door, roughly disarming the stunned commandos. Han, Chewie, and Leia exchanged helpless, hopeless looks. They'd been the rebellion's last chance. They failed. Some distance from the main area of battle, coasting safely in the center of a blanket of ships that contributed to the Imperial Fleet, was the flagship Super Star Destroyer. On the bridge, Admiral Piet watched the war through the enormous observation window, curious as if viewing an elaborate demonstration or an entertainment. 2 fleet captains stood behind him, respectively silent, also learning the elegant designs of their Emperor. "Have the fleet hold here," Admiral Piet ordered. The first captain hurried to carry out the order. The second stepped up to the window beside the Admiral. "We aren't going to attack?" Piet smirked. "I have my orders from the Emperor himself. He has something special planned for this rebel scum." He accented the specialness with a long pause for the inquisitive captain to savor. "We are only to keep them from escaping." The Emperor, Lord Vader, and Luke watched the aerial battle rage from the safety of the throne room in the Death Star. It was a scene of pandemonium, silent and crystalline explosions surrounded by green, violet, or magenta auras, wildly vicious dogfights, gracefully floating crags of melted steel, icicle sprays that might have been blood. Luke watched in horror as another rebel ship toppled against the unseeable deflector shield, exploding in a fiery concussion. Vader watched Luke. His boy was powerful, stronger than he'd imagined, and still pliable. Not lost yet, either to the sickening, weakly side of the Force that had to beg for everything it received, or to the Emperor who feared Luke with reason. There was yet time to take Luke for his own, to retake him, to join with him in dark majesty, to rule the galaxy together. It would only take patience and a little wizardry to show Luke the exquisite satisfaction of the dark way and to pry him from the Emperor's terrified clutch. Vader knew Luke had seen it too. The Emperor's fear. He He was a clever boy, young Luke. Vader smiled grimly to himself. He was his father's son. The Emperor interrupted Vader's contemplation with a crackled remark to Luke. As you can see, my young apprentice, the deflector shield is still in place. Your friends have failed. And now, he raised his spindly hand above his head to mark this moment. Witness the power of this fully armed and operational battle station. He walked over to the comlink and spoke in a gravely whisper, as if to a lover. Fire at will, Commander! In shock and in foreknowledge, Luke looked out across the surface of the Death Star to the space battle beyond and to the bulk of the Rebel fleet beyond that. Down in the bowels of the Death Star, Commander Jerjerrod gave an order. It was with mixed feelings that he issued the command because it meant the final destruction of the Rebel insurrectionists, which meant an end to the state of war which Jerjerrod cherished above all things. But second to ongoing war itself, Jerjerrod loved total annihilation. So while tempered with regret, this order was not entirely without thrill. At Jerjerrod's instruction, a controller pulled a switch which ignited a blinking panel. 2 hooded Imperial soldiers pushed a series of buttons. A thick beam of light slowly pulsed from a long, heavily blockaded shaft. On the outer surface of the completed half of the Death Star, a giant laser dish began to glow. Luke watched in an impotent horror as the unbelievably huge laser beam radiated out from the muzzle of the Death Star. It touched for only an instant one of the Rebel star cruisers and was surging in the midst of the heaviest fighting. And in the next instant, the star cruiser was vaporized, blown to dust, returned to its most elemental particles in a single burst of light. In the numbering group of despair, with the hollowest of voids devouring his heart, Luke's eyes alone glinted, for he saw again his lightsaber lying unattended on the throne, and in this bleak and livid moment the dark side was much with him.